Welcome back to Shattered Trust Stories. It was supposed to be the best day of my life. My 40th birthday. A milestone. A celebration of everything I'd accomplished, the family I had, and the life I'd built. For weeks, my wife had been planning the party, and my kids were buzzing with excitement, whispering secrets about the cake and decorations. My parents, siblings, and even my aunts and uncles had all flown in for the occasion. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of good food, and the warmth of love, or so I thought. The party was perfect. Balloons floated in every corner. A towering cake sat proudly on the dining table, and the sound of clinking glasses and cheerful toasts filled the air. My family was all there, just like they'd been for every major moment of my life. We laughed as we shared stories. My dad recounting the time I'd tried to build a treehouse and ended up falling into a bush. My mom teasing me about my first crush in middle school, and my siblings ribbing me about my questionable fashion choices in the 90s. It felt like a celebration of me, of the life I'd lived and the people who had been there every step of the way. But then, as the night wound down and the guests began to leave, my parents asked to speak to me privately. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe they wanted to give me a special gift or share some heartfelt advice for this new decade of my life. But the moment I saw their faces, I knew something was wrong. They led me into the study, a room that had always felt cozy and safe, but now felt suffocating. My dad closed the door behind us, and my mom sat me down on the couch. I'll never forget the look on their faces. It was a mix of guilt, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe? Relief? They exchanged a glance, and my dad took a deep breath before speaking. "There's something we need to tell you," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "Something we should have told you a long time ago." My heart started to race. I couldn't imagine what could be so serious that they'd waited until my 40th birthday to tell me. Was someone sick? Had something happened to a family member? My mind raced with possibilities, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "You were adopted," my mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air like a thick fog, suffocating and disorienting. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline, waiting for them to laugh and say, "Just kidding." But they didn't. They just sat there, looking at me with those same guilty expressions. "What do you mean I was adopted?" I finally managed to ask, my voice cracking. My dad sighed and began to explain. They'd adopted me as a baby, just a few weeks old. They'd never told me because they wanted me to feel like I was truly theirs, like I belonged. They thought it would be easier this way, that I'd never need to know. But as the years went on, the secret became harder to keep, and they didn't know how to tell me. So they waited and waited until finally, on my 40th birthday, they decided it was time. Just like that, everything I thought I knew about myself was gone. The family I'd loved and trusted for 40 years had been keeping this secret from me. And the way they told me, it wasn't out of love or concern. It was almost like they were relieved to finally say it, like I was some burden they'd been carrying, that I felt like a stranger in my own life. Who was I really? Where did I come from? And why had they waited until now to tell me? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I looked at my parents, no, my adoptive parents, and felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. How could they have kept this from me? How could they have lied to me for 40 years? The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I felt like I was living in someone else's life. My wife tried to comfort me, but even she didn't know what to say. My kids, sensing something was wrong, asked why Grandpa and Grandma seemed so quiet. I didn't know how to explain it to them. How do you tell your children that the family they've always known is built on a lie? My family tried to act normal, but there was a tension in the air that couldn't be ignored. My siblings avoided the topic, pretending like nothing had happened. My parents tiptoed around me, their guilt written all over their faces. It was like they were waiting for me to just get over it. But how could I? My entire identity had been shattered. I didn't know who I was anymore. Then, 2 weeks later, everything changed again. The will was dated just a few months before my grandmother passed away, but it felt like an eternity before I even knew it existed. My family had always been tight-lipped about certain things, and I never questioned their word. They were the people I trusted, the people who had raised me. I had always been told that my adoption was a result of kindness, that my parents had simply opened their hearts to a child in need, giving me a home and a family. But when I read the will, that carefully constructed narrative began to unravel in front of me. That my grandmother, always so sharp in her way, had known all along about my adoption. She'd known about my biological mother, and she had kept her secrets, secrets she had never shared with anyone, not even my parents. In her final days, she had left a part of the story for me to discover, a story that would reveal everything about my origins and so much more. According to the will, my adoption wasn't just a random act of kindness or an altruistic decision. It was, in fact, part of a much larger, darker, and more complicated web of secrets that my family had worked hard to bury. That my biological mother hadn't been some stranger to my parents, as they had always made it seem. No, she had been a close family friend, someone my parents had known for years, someone they had trusted. But things had changed. My biological mother, as it turns out, had fallen on hard times, financially and personally. She had made the heartbreaking decision to give me up, but it wasn't because she didn't want me. Far from it. She loved me more than anything, but she was pressured by my adoptive parents. They had made her feel as though she had no other choice. They painted a picture of a future that she couldn't provide for me, a life that would be uncertain, and a child who would suffer. The will described how my parents had subtly convinced my biological mother that this was the only option. They had coerced her, not with outright force, but with manipulative words, gently guiding her toward a decision that would ensure she was never part of my life again. The idea of her relinquishing me had been painted as an act of love, but it felt anything but as the will revealed these painful truths. My shock turned to a simmering anger. Why had they done this? What had motivated them to take such drastic measures? Had they truly believed I would be better off without my birth mother in my life? Or was there something more sinister at play? These were questions I would never have answers to without digging deeper into the past, and now I had a lifetime of truth to uncover. And that wasn't all. The will revealed something I had never even considered. My grandmother had left me a significant portion of the family estate, something that would change my life in ways I couldn't yet comprehend. The estate was not just a token of her love for me, but a testament to how much she truly knew, how much she had always seen. My adoptive parents, however, had known about this inheritance all along. They had known that I would inherit this wealth, but they had hidden it from me, hoping I would never find out. They thought they could keep me in the dark forever, locking away this truth, just as they had locked away the story of my birth. That I felt betrayed in a way I had never imagined possible. The people I trusted most in the world had been hiding things from me, things about who I really was and about my place in the world. I wanted to confront them, to demand answers, but a part of me felt like I couldn't. I didn't know where to begin or what it would mean for me to challenge everything I had known about my life. The truth had come crashing down, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. But amidst the anger and betrayal, there was something else, a feeling of relief. Finally, I had answers to questions I'd never even known to ask. I wasn't just a child abandoned or an orphan taken in by good-hearted strangers. I was someone who had been at the center of a complicated, painful story, a story that had been hidden from me for so long. And in some ways, knowing the truth brought a sense of clarity. I could see the bigger picture now, the intricacies of decisions made long before I had a voice in the matter. Yet, I was left with even more questions. Why had my parents gone to such lengths to hide the truth from me? What were they so afraid of? Was it the shame of their involvement in my biological mother's pain? Or was there something deeper, something they feared I might uncover if I dug too far? There were so many things I didn't know, so many layers to the story that remained buried under the weight of secrets. And as I sat there, holding my grandmother's will in my hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to uncover, so many untold stories, buried not just in dusty old papers, but in the silences and unspoken words of those closest to me. What else were they hiding? What else had been kept from me for my entire life? It was clear now. The truth wasn't just buried in the will. It was buried in the past. And I was going to have to dig deep to find out what it really meant. With the will as my starting point, I knew I had to dive deep into the tangled web of my past to make sense of everything that had been hidden from me for so long. It wasn't going to be easy, but I couldn't ignore the call for answers any longer. The truth had already begun to shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew. And now it was time to uncover the full extent of the story. No matter where it led me, that I began reaching out to old family friends, those whose names I had heard growing up, but whose faces were distant and blurry in my memory. I sent emails, made phone calls, and even tracked down addresses, hoping for any scrap of information that could shed light on my birth mother and the circumstances surrounding my adoption. Every conversation brought new pieces of the puzzle, some clearer than others, but all of them confirmed that there was far more to this story than I had ever been told, that in addition to speaking with family and old acquaintances, I started searching through public records, hoping to find any legal documents, medical records, or anything else that might give me more insight into the past. I spent countless hours at libraries, archives, and government offices. At times, the process felt like an exhausting scavenger hunt. But the more I dug, the more I realized that there were gaps that only a personal connection could fill. That's when I decided to take the next step, hiring a private investigator. The investigator was a quiet, no-nonsense professional who understood the urgency behind my search. He started tracking down every lead, scouring records, and interviewing anyone who might have information about my biological mother. Weeks went by, and though I began to feel the weight of the search, I knew I was getting closer to the truth. And then, one day, the investigator found her, my biological mother's sister, my aunt. It felt surreal to know that a part of my family was still out there, that the connection I'd longed for was so close, yet so hidden. The investigator gave me her contact information, and after some careful deliberation, I reached out to her. I was nervous, unsure of what I might find or how she might react to hearing from me after all these years, but to my surprise, she agreed to meet with me. We set a time and place, and I arrived at the cafe where we were to meet with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. When I saw her for the first time, it was like stepping into a dream. She had the same eyes as me, those deep, soulful eyes that had always felt so familiar, even though I had no memory of where they came from. Her smile was also mine, the same crooked curve at the corner of her mouth, the same warmth in her expression. In that moment, I realized just how much of my own identity had been hidden from me, pieces of myself that I had never understood. That we sat down, and the conversation began slowly, with tentative words at first. She shared stories about my mother, stories I had never heard before, filled with warmth and love. She told me how much my biological mother had adored me, how every day after giving me up had been filled with heartache. My mother had never stopped thinking about me, had never stopped wishing she could have kept me. She spoke of my mother's strength and resilience, and how, despite everything, she always held on to the hope that one day I would know the truth. But the most difficult part of the conversation came when my aunt confirmed what the will had hinted at. My adoptive parents had been the driving force behind my mother's decision to give me up. They had pressured her, used their influence to make her believe that she was doing what was best for me. My aunt didn't have all the details, but she knew enough. She knew that my adoptive parents had desperately wanted a child, and when they couldn't have one of their own, they did whatever it took to secure me. The idea that they had manipulated my biological mother into giving me up, despite the fact that she wanted to keep me, hit me like a ton of bricks today as she spoke. My mind raced with the implications of what she was saying. My adoptive parents hadn't just offered a home for a child in need. They had essentially taken me from my biological mother, used their position of power and influence to make a decision that was never theirs to make. I wanted to ask her more, to understand how deep this manipulation had gone, but the words were stuck in my throat that I learned that my mother had been in a vulnerable place when she made the decision to give me up. The pressure from my adoptive parents had made it feel like an inevitability, like she had no other choice. And the worst part? She had been made to believe that she was somehow unworthy of raising her own child, that I would be better off in a different home, with a family who could offer me a better life. The pain of that realization stung deeply. Knowing that the love my mother had for me was never enough to protect me from the forces that had torn us apart, as the conversation wound down, my aunt gave me a piece of advice that I would carry with me. Don't let the past define you, she said. But don't forget it either. The truth is important, even if it hurts. I left that meeting with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of clarity. The pieces of the story were coming together, but the journey was far from over. My adoptive parents had hidden so much from me, and now I had to confront the reality of what they had done and the consequences it would have on my relationship with them. The truth had been a long time coming, but now that I had it, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The person I had been was no longer the person I would be, and the story of my past was still unfolding layer by painful layer. With the truth finally on my side, there was no way I could turn back. I had spent months uncovering the hidden corners of my past, piecing together the fragments of a story that had been kept from me for far too long. Now it was time to fight for what was rightfully mine, to reclaim what my grandmother had left me. The inheritance wasn't just a financial asset. It represented a connection to a family I had never truly known, a part of my identity that had been obscured by lies and manipulation. That I hired a lawyer, someone experienced in estate law and familiar with the complexities that often surrounded cases like mine. I needed someone who understood the weight of the situation, both the emotional toll and the legal battles that lay ahead. The lawyer's name was Sarah, and when we first met, I could see that she wasn't someone who would back down easily. She had a sharp mind, a no-nonsense attitude, and a clear understanding of the law. She told me it would be a long road ahead, but with the will as our foundation, she was confident we could make progress. That we began the process of officially claiming my inheritance, a task that seemed straightforward in theory, but was far from it. The first step was to file the necessary paperwork and submit the will to probate. In the beginning, everything seemed like it was going according to plan. But, as with so many things in my life, it wasn't going to be that easy. As soon as the paperwork was filed, my adoptive family erupted in protest. They weren't going to let me claim the estate without a fight. My adoptive parents, who had once tried so hard to keep the truth about my adoption hidden, now stood firmly in opposition to my inheritance. They contested the will, arguing that it was invalid, that my grandmother hadn't been of sound mind when she wrote it, or that perhaps there had been some kind of mistake. Their arguments were convoluted, and their claims were nothing more than desperate attempts to hold on to the money and the power they had spent years securing. I could feel their presence looming over every step of the process, like a shadow that refused to fade. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. My adoptive family had never fully accepted the fact that I wasn't theirs in the way they wanted me to be. They had fought so hard to shape my life, to mold me into something they could call their own. And now that I was fighting for what I deserved, they weren't about to give up without a struggle. The legal battle quickly became a complex, exhausting series of back-and-forth motions, depositions, and hearings. I found myself constantly surrounded by lawyers, courtrooms, and piles of paperwork. Each meeting felt like a new obstacle to overcome. Every time we thought we were making progress, my adoptive family would throw up new challenges. They hired their own team of lawyers, each more determined than the last to discredit the will and prevent me from getting what was rightfully mine. They called into question the legitimacy of my grandmother's mental state at the time the will was drafted, suggesting that she had been confused or coerced. There were days when the weight of it all seemed unbearable. I had to relive the darkest parts of my life every time I sat down for a meeting or entered a courtroom. My adoptive parents' accusations felt like another betrayal, and every hearing was a reminder of just how far they were willing to go to erase my connection to the family I had never known. It was as if they wanted to wipe away my entire existence, all the while maintaining their control over me. The emotional toll was immense, but I couldn't afford to let it break me. Through all the turmoil, Sarah was a constant source of support. She guided me through each stage of the process, reminding me that we had the truth on our side. She kept pushing forward despite the setbacks, and I knew that I had to stay focused. Every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself why I was doing this: to honor the memory of my biological mother, to stand up for the truth, and to reclaim my rightful place in the world. There were moments when I wanted to walk away. The thought of continuing the fight, day after day, felt draining. My adoptive family's tactics grew more underhanded as they tried to paint me as ungrateful or reckless. They would twist my words, question my motives, and try to portray me as someone who only cared about money. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about finances. It was about the closure I had sought for so long. It was about confronting the reality of my past and ensuring that my grandmother's wishes were honored. As the months dragged on, the case began to attract more attention. News outlets caught wind of the story, and suddenly, my fight for the inheritance became public knowledge. It was both surreal and overwhelming. People who had no connection to me started weighing in on the case, offering their opinions on my side or my adoptive family's side. It was strange to see strangers discuss my life like it was entertainment, but it also gave me a sense of validation. If so many people were following the case, it meant that the truth mattered to others too. But with every new layer of attention came new pressures. My adoptive family, who had always kept up a facade of normalcy, were now being scrutinized. I couldn't help but wonder how they felt, knowing that their carefully constructed world was unraveling in front of everyone. Were they regretting their actions, or did they still believe they had the right to control my life? The case stretched on for what felt like an eternity. I spent countless nights lying awake, wondering if there would ever be an end in sight. The toll it took on me was immeasurable, emotionally, mentally, and physically. But through it all, I never lost sight of the goal. I was fighting for something bigger than myself. I was fighting for the truth, for the chance to reclaim my birthright, and for the justice that had been denied to me for so long. Eventually, after months of legal wrangling and emotional strain, the court ruled in my favor. The will was deemed valid, and I was awarded the inheritance my grandmother had left me. It was a bittersweet victory, though, because it didn't undo the years of manipulation and deceit. I had won what was mine, but the emotional scars would linger far longer. It had been a long, exhausting fight, but I had come out on the other side stronger. I had reclaimed my past, my identity, and the family connection I had been denied. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew one thing for sure. I had taken control of my story, and no one, not even my adoptive family, could take that away from me. The legal battle was finally over, but in many ways, the real journey was only just beginning. I had won the inheritance, and with it, I had reclaimed a part of my life that had been hidden from me for so long. But the emotions that came with all of this were far more complicated than any court decision. I had spent years grappling with questions about my identity, about who I was and where I came from, and now I found myself on the precipice of forging connections that I hadn't known existed. The victory in the courtroom was important, yes, but it was just one chapter in a much larger, much more emotional story. The first and most important relationship I began to rebuild was with my aunt. The moment we met, I knew there was something special between us, something undeniable. We had the same eyes, the same smile, and as I got to know her better, I realized that we shared so many of the same mannerisms and ways of thinking. It was uncanny, and it made me feel a connection to my biological mother that I had never experienced before. My aunt became my bridge to the past, and slowly, she helped me piece together the story of my mother's life and her love for me. Our conversations were filled with memories of a woman who had, in so many ways, been forced to give up the one thing she held most dear. My aunt spoke of my mother with so much love, her words always tinged with sadness, but also with a sense of pride. I heard stories of how much my mother had wanted to be a part of my life, how she had hoped that, one day, I would know the truth. There was healing in these conversations, both for me and for her. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly connected to my roots, to the part of me that had always been absent. But even as I began building this new relationship with my biological family, I knew there was still work to be done on the other side of my story, my adoptive family. For so long, they had been the only family I knew, the people who raised me and gave me a home. But the truth of what they had done, the years of secrecy and manipulation, had left me scarred. I couldn't just forget what had happened, and I wasn't sure I could ever fully forgive them for their part in my adoption. The hurt was deep, and the betrayal was real. However, as I sat with these emotions, I realized that holding on to anger and resentment would only continue to hurt me. It would keep me tied to a past I was trying to move beyond. The anger I felt towards them was like a weight around my neck, and I knew I couldn't truly move forward until I let go of some of it. I didn't have to forgive them immediately, and I didn't have to forget what had happened. But I did have to accept that, for my own peace of mind, I couldn't allow that anger to control me. So over time, I began to make peace with my adoptive family. Not because I had forgiven them or because I suddenly understood their actions, but because I understood that holding on to the bitterness would never change what had happened. It would only drag me down. I began to have conversations with my parents, the kind of honest, difficult conversations we had never had before. I didn't sugarcoat my feelings, but I also didn't try to accuse them of everything that had gone wrong. I spoke from a place of hurt, yes, but also a place of wanting to understand them better and ultimately to understand myself. That I end those conversations, I began to see my parents in a different light. I realized that they weren't just villains in my story. They were flawed people who had made choices, some of which were misguided or selfish, but who had also loved me in their own way. They had made mistakes, big mistakes, but they had also given me a life that, despite everything, I could be proud of. They had cared for me, nurtured me, and taught me valuable lessons. Yes, they had hidden things from me, but they had also provided me with stability, security, and a home that wasn't an easy realization. It wasn't a simple act of forgiveness, either. It took time for me to come to terms with it. But as I spent more time thinking about what I truly needed, I realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who love you, who show up for you when it matters, and who help you become the person you are meant to be. And while my adoptive family had failed me in some important ways, they had also given me something precious, a life that had allowed me to grow, to learn, and to eventually find my place in the world. In the end, I learned that family is complex, messy, and not always what we expect. It's about love, loyalty, and honesty. It's about those who choose to stand by you, even when it's hard, even when the truth is uncomfortable. I had spent so long resenting my adoptive family for what they had done, for the lies they had told, but when I took a step back, I saw the whole picture. They weren't perfect, but they had been there for me in ways that mattered. And perhaps, in some twisted way, they had loved me as much as they knew how to ask for my biological family. The journey was still unfolding. I was still learning about my mother, my aunt, and the generations that had come before them. But in those relationships, I found something I had been searching for my entire life, a connection to my true self, to the people who had always been a part of me, even when I didn't know it wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a healing process. And I had learned the most important lesson of all, that family isn't just about where you come from. It's about where you find love, acceptance, and the courage to be honest with yourself and with others. It's about learning to let go of the pain, to forgive when necessary, and to move forward with a heart open to the relationships that truly matter. Life is a way of throwing us curveballs when we least expect it. No matter how much we try to control the path we take, things rarely go exactly as we plan. In fact, the most difficult moments in our lives, the ones that feel like they're breaking us, can often lead to the most unexpected and profound discoveries about who we are and what we're truly capable of. For me, that discovery came in the form of the truth about my past, about my adoption, my biological family, and the secrets that had been buried for so long. It wasn't an easy revelation. It didn't come without pain, betrayal, or heartache. But in the end, the truth gave me something far more valuable than answers. It gave me the strength to stand up for myself, to fight for what was rightfully mine, and to embrace the person I had become, despite all the obstacles that had been placed in my way. That it's incredible to look back and realize that those painful moments, those moments that felt like they might swallow me whole, were the very things that shaped my resilience. Each setback, each betrayal, and each heart-wrenching truth I uncovered was a lesson. I learned that I am stronger than I ever realized, that we all are. And when we stand up for ourselves, when we fight for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds, that's when we truly discover our strength. The journey wasn't just about claiming an inheritance or uncovering the truth about my family. It was about discovering who I really am and embracing the full spectrum of my identity, both the parts one was given and the parts one had to fight for. It was about learning to reconcile the love I had for my adoptive family with the anger and betrayal I had felt, about understanding that family doesn't always fit neatly into a box of blood and biology. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to love you, the ones who stand by you through thick and thin, even when things get complicated. The story of my life isn't just mine. It's a story of resilience, of redemption, and of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of circumstances. And the most beautiful part of it all is that I'm not alone in this journey. We all have our own stories, our own battles, and our own discoveries to make. The key is to keep going, to keep fighting, and to always believe in the power of our own stories. Thank you for being here with me as I shared mine. Your support, your encouragement, and your willingness to listen means more than words can express. It's a reminder that we're all connected by our experiences and that we can find strength in each other's journeys. If my story has resonated with you, if it's reminded you of your own resilience or your own journey of self-discovery, then I am truly grateful. Before you go, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of resilience, redemption, and the incredible power of the human spirit. There are more stories coming, stories that remind us that no matter how tough life gets, we are capable of overcoming it. Until next time, stay strong, and never forget to believe in the power of your own story. Your journey is yours alone, and there's strength in every step you take. Keep writing your story, no matter what obstacles may come your way.